All right, you got a hand for us, Romy?
Yes, it was last week at the Win 2-5 nine-handed table. One seat was empty at the time, so we were eight-handed.
Do you live in Vegas?
No, I live in Ohio. I was out there for a conference. I play more online. I rarely get to play live. Every 2 or 3 months, I'll go down and play like at Shark Tank in Columbus.
Okay. And you're a doctor, right?
Yeah, I'm an ER doctor. Yeah,
ER doctor, right? ER doctor, poker app exporter and creator, jack of all trades.
yeah, button clicker. Yeah.
So, win is a 1,500 cap, if I'm not mistaken, right at 2.5. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah, I was buying in for 1,000, so we were about 1,100 effective in this hand.
Okay, so 1,500, 2.5, win. And the win in Vegas is a lot fucking better than the win in Boston, let me tell you. And it's not close. So you're 1,100 effective. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And the Win Millions tournament was going on, so the games were good. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it folds to the small blind, who is this young kid, still in braces. He's a Euro. I later find out he's Romanian. And he always plays the blinds. If he doesn't have a hand he wants to play, he always flicks the $2 over to the big blind and mucks his hand.
Okay.
He raises to 20.
So it gets so this is blind versus blind, and this guy doesn't chop.
Correct. Yep.
Right. Euro guy, is that what you said?
Yeah, he's Romanian. He's good. He's tight. He's aggressive. I didn't find out he was Romanian until like the next day when I happened to be at a table with him again, and was because I didn't. He spoke with his girlfriend when she would come sit occasionally with him, and had an accent that I recognized. It kind of sounded Eastern European, but I didn't know exactly what. And as long as you didn't try and talk to him about poker, he would smile and talk with you. If you tried to say something about poker, you just got a blank stare. But yeah.
Oh, typical. So you're in the big blind with.
Ace of spades, ace of clubs.
Oh, okay, that's a good spot. You don't chop. You want to play it out? Oh, okay, I'll play. All right. So I assume you 3-bet.
Yeah, I make it 65.
So hero 3-bets to 65. Okay, in position.
Right. And he calls.
So small blind calls. It's kind of an interesting, like, little range scenario of, because we don't usually play blind versus blind all that much, and you probably shouldn't although a rake is better than a drop, but even with a rake, I would say, this is the thing you have to think about. It really can be boiled down to as simple as this. Would you play somebody heads up for the amount of money that they're going to take? I mean, it's very obvious in California you would never play somebody heads up for $5 a hand, but let's just say that on average, blind versus blind scenario where the small blind raises, the hand will cost you $3 on average. You know, sometimes you raise it and take it. Sometimes you play bigger pots. But let's say it costs $3 on average. Would you play someone heads up, especially from out of position? But obviously that doesn't matter. In position, out of position. Would you play somebody for $3 a hand and then play that out? Times 30 hands.
Probably not. Yeah.
No, you wouldn't. So that's why you should probably chop. And I know you said you probably would chop, but he doesn't. So it's just a very simple way to look at it.
He, even if he, when there was a person in between us, if he flicked his $2 over to the other person, and they said no, I want to chop, and he would just say good. No, I don't chop. I always play, and he would still muck his hand to leave their $2 and still give him the $2. So
out of principle,
he was pretty emphatic that he played. So yeah.
Okay, so you're at 130 to the flop. Okay.
Right. Flop is Jack of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds.
Jack of Hearts, Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds. Not necessarily the best flop you want to see for aces, but I mean he can be wide. It's not an incredibly tight configuration, obviously.
He checked. I bet 45, and he raised to 200.
And small blind raises to 200. So this is interesting here because I do wonder. I got a couple of things to say here about this one. Even though you just sort of told me this backstory on this guy. Just even with that little bit that he's so emphatic about not chopping, that he's obviously European. He's obviously here to play for profit, and also to the fact that you hold two aces in your hand, and I'm not talking about just the fact that you have pocket aces. I'm talking about the fact that because you have two aces in your hand, it's less likely that he has ace high, which I'll get to in a second. I kind of want to check this. I actually want to check the flop back to try to get him to bluff later on. He seems like the type of guy that might start taking hands that other maybe less thinking live players won't bluff with, and realize that he might have to bluff with it like 6-7 suited, or something like that has very little showdown value. And again, I would probably do this less often with king because then there's more ace highs that he could play for a showdown oriented line, which would be him not bluffing, but you holding ace, less of a chance that he has ace high. Now, with that being said, do I think that betting is terrible? No, I don't think betting is terrible. I might be a lot more apt to call down against a player like this, but I don't know if he's adjusting. I don't know if he's thinking that you have less jacks. Like you're not an older guy, but he thinks you're a non-thinking player, middle-aged guy, and thinks he can get you off of an overpair and that you're not going to be 3-betting Jack X all that much. I just think with this backstory, I actually like a check to get him to bluff later on more than a bet. Now, with that being said, you bet 45, he makes it 200. I mean, you can't fold now, that's for sure.
Right, yeah, and I've really looked a lot at this hand and have been thinking a lot about it. I even loaded up Nate Ball's ranges for blind versus blind into GTO Plus and looked at it. With the ace of diamonds in hand, it checks at a very high rate. With my specific combo, it actually wanted to bet bigger. But yeah, so it bet at a pretty high frequency for, if I gave it a bunch of bet sizes to choose from, it would choose like $100 bet.
Well, you're talking about like in GTO Plus, right? Or
correct.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay. So I'm assuming you call, right?
Yeah. So I call.
Okay. 530. Okay.
Turn is a black 10. I think it was the 10 of spades.
Okay. So Jack of hearts, Jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds. Turn is the 10 of spades. Now, obviously I did those podcasts on all about draws from a few weeks ago, Rummy. I don't know if you heard it, but if we are bluff catching against a range where the bluffs are draws, then the board pairing is very good for us. It's very good for us. Now, in this particular case, it appears to be very good for us because I don't know if there's a whole lot of 10x 10x check raises here for protection / value on a Jack 10 board. Usually not. Sometimes you'll see lowish top pair hands check raised for protection in a spot like this, but I don't usually see it on a paired board. So, and it's very, very few and far between that any live player is ever going to find it. So that's why a 10 is a really good card for us, because of the fact that on Jack 10 with 2 diamonds, it's just a total brick if he's never check raising a 10.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking if I was ahead, I'm still ahead. If I was behind, I'm way behind, or still behind. He checks, which I found interesting. Put me in kind of an interesting spot. And I thought about it quite a bit, thinking, one part of me wanted to put out a small protection bet to charge all his draws. And as I was thinking about bet sizing and thinking about pulling out some chips to bet, the thought stack and donk popped into my head. Doesn't exactly apply, but thinking he was going to check jam all in kind of popped into my head. At which point I would probably be forced to call. But I ended up checking behind.
So before you go on, so what I would say here is that, sometimes in live poker, we can get into situations where we're fairly unbalanced, which I think is fine. But this is actually a spot where I would find myself kind of balanced, in the sense where, let's say that you had a jack here and you bet the flop and this guy check raised you and you called, and now he checked the turn on a 10, I would check it back. There's really no reason to bet, I don't think. So I actually find myself balanced in this spot where you might have overpairs and you might have Jack X. I actually don't think I'm doing a whole lot of betting here because I think there's more value on a board like this. If you bet called a Jack on a draw heavy board, obviously there's less of a chance that he has a Jack, right? And he's not going to have, there's only one combo of 10-10 now that a 10 comes. So when he checks the turn, it's going to be a give up a lot because less of a chance he has a Jack. Now he's just like, this is a terrible card for me. And if you just bet a Jack, he's just going to fold, right? So I would check back a Jack here a ton to get bluffing equity. So this is in a spot where you actually are a little bit balanced and you can check back ace here for those reasons, because we will have a Jack here, I think, some of the time. You also might have a 10 here some of the time too that you're not folding. So I think checking back your entire range here in this particular configuration is probably what I would do. I do have to read a funny, well, not a funny, but a very poignant, interesting comment here from Scott Alford. He says, if he's a Euro like me, he just has thick value here, I think, a lot. He's talking about, obviously, the flop check raise. You want to check back the flop versus Spanish guys because they blast off versus capped ranges, which was my initial thought, Rummy. But Romanians just have it here, IMO. Well, it's
okay.
Maybe so. But I will. Yeah, I don't know. Some of these Eastern European guys are pretty fucking nitty. I just think I'm checking back everything here on the turn. So you did check it back, right?
I did check back. Yep.
Okay, so here checks back. Okay. So 530 to the river. Okay.
The river's another 10. I believe it was the other black 10. Yeah.
Another 10. Okay. So the board is Jack, Jack, 10, 10, 10. So it doesn't really change anything at all, actually, except the fact that it just goes to show it's very hard for him to ever have a 10. Again, the only thing that it changes is that slight time, which I find very hard to believe that he ever had check raised the flop with a 10. Now it's even less likely, right? But you're losing to a Jack here. That's what you're losing to, a Jack. Now, even before you tell me what happened, the only little quirk, and I do find it probably very, very unlikely, is if somehow he flatted with a big pair, like he didn't 4-bet you pre, like with kings or something like that, and now he's like, oh, well, I can take this for value with kings or queens. But I think guys that don't chop, they're going to, that type of player, because it's so rare, is going to put in the 4-bet with queens and kings if they get 3-bet by the big blind, because it's such a rare spot anyways to play blind versus blind. I would find it shocking. And then if he was a guy that was playing queens as a flat here, is he check raising, the flop that much on this board? So those are the very, very subtle things that I find on this is gonna, if this guy bets at you, it's going to be a Jack or nothing, I think. So what happens here?
I will say that I must put out a little bit of an OMC vibe because I almost got a guy to fold pocket kings when I 5-bet jammed into him. But yeah. So what he does here is he jams for about 800, 835, somewhere in that range, effective.
Small blind jams for 830.
Yeah.
So over the size of the pot. Yeah.
Yeah, about a pot and a half. Yeah.
I mean, so you're getting about a pot. I mean, well, it's kind of, it's not necessarily off the rails. I mean, I think it would be a deviation to fold here as played, I think. I mean, besides Jack X. Now, with that being said, is ace the best hand you're going to have here as played? No, it's not, because we said, at least for me, I would check back everything on the turn. So the best hand I'm going to have here is a Jack, right? Or the best hand I'm going to have here is a 10, right? Which is me betting and calling a check raise and then checking back turn. So it's going to be a 10 and then followed by a Jack and then followed by aces. Those will be the best hands that I have in that order. Now he's betting pot and a half. So, you're supposed to call with like the top the top 60% of, 40% of hands that you arrive here with, because he's got to be good here on his bluff 60% of the time because he's betting pot and a half. I mean, you would think that some guys who are professionals who are playing for profit would find some bluffs here enough to make this a call. With that being said, it's one of these spots where it looks like you have something so much here that I get a little bit concerned because maybe he's just taking you to Value Town for, thinking you're never going to fold an overpair. Although you could have some bet calls here with ace king and king queen here too. Just close your eyes and call. Just close your eyes and call, Rummy. Call.
That's basically what I did. I sighed and flipped in a chip, and he turned over queen of spades, jack of spades.
For queen of spades, jack of spades.
Yeah.
Fucking Romanians. Go back to Bucharest.
Right. He was a good kid.
No, it's thank you for the interesting thoughts on that though, Scott Alford. One of the best comments that we've had. That's a tough one, Rummy. I do think it's interesting because I don't know what you would have done on the turn, Rummy, but I think you should check back everything on the turn. So you aren't quite as up on the top of that MDF scale because you're checking back everything on the turn, or you should be. But still, it's still aces though. But I still think that I actually like to check back the flop to try to get this guy to blast off. Either way, I mean, it's going to be tough for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, and when I made the bet on the flop, my specific thought was I unblock ace of diamonds. So that was one of my reasons for betting there. But yeah.
What was the other thing I was going to say? So, by the way, too, is that there's another thing that's kind of interesting. If he doesn't have anything and he thinks you have any other holding that's not a pair, it's just a chop. If somehow he doesn't have anything, like if he had king queen or something like that and he check raised and you had ace king, it's just a chop if you call. So, calling for a chop is, you're going to get worse pot odds, which makes it actually somewhat of a better line as an aggressive line for him there too. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. Thank you very much for the call. Appreciate it.